So I am currently Liam McArthur's Research and Legal Advisor on the proposed Assisted Dying for Terminally Ill Adults Scotland Bill. Previously I was CEO of Friends at the End, and I also worked with Margot MacDonald and Patrick Harvey MSP on the previous bill that was brought forward in Scotland. I'll talk a bit about the sort of lessons learned from the previous attempts to change the law and how those differ from the current proposal in Scotland. So first of all, I'll talk a bit about the process, because things do differ quite a lot from what's happening in particularly in England. So Liam McArthur lodged a proposal to bring a bill forward in September of 2021. And following that, we ran a 12-week consultation in Scotland where members of the public, stakeholders and others could write into the consultation, giving us their views. The consultation received over 14,000 responses, which is the biggest response ever to a Scottish Parliament consultation. And it gave us the biggest data set that we've ever had on any proposal in Scotland. And that's really important because, again, referring back to previous attempts, we had to rely on templates from other jurisdictions, and we were told that parachuting information in from places like Oregon and others wasn't going to work, and that we needed some Scotland-specific data. So the last bill fell in 2015, and that's exactly what we did, and I'll come on to that in a second. So the consultation, as I said, ran for 12 weeks. It gave us this huge amount of data, which then had to be processed. Essentially, that took nearly a year's worth of our time processing the responses, making sure that they were all legitimate. And we also had some issues to deal with from the opposition, who tried to make it difficult for us in terms of the accountability of the consultation. However, we know that all of the ordinary parliamentary processes were followed. So that was eventually published, the report and all of the responses were published in September of 2022. What we had to do then was to gain cross-party support from politicians across the political parties in Scotland. And we had to secure 18 signatures to allow the bill to progress and go forward. We lodged the final proposal on the same morning as Queen Elizabeth died. Who obviously we weren't, we didn't know this was going to happen, so we launched the proposal. The Queen then died, and Parliament shut down for 2 weeks. So during that time, we couldn't rally round and try and secure the support of members of Parliament. However, on the first day of, within hours actually of lodging the proposal, we secured more than enough MSPs, so we needed 18, and in the end we got 36. We stopped at 36 in part because there was this grieving process for Queen Elizabeth, and also because that was the number of MSPs who had voted for the bill at stage 1 during the Assisted Suicide Scotland Bill of 2015. So that was the end process in stage 1, where all the members had a vote in the chamber, and this is just the very beginning. We haven't even drafted the bill yet, and we have the same level of support. And I'll come on to that in a second about why now we have decided that it's the right time to bring a bill in Scotland, and in part that is due to the huge public support and also the parliamentary support that we see in session 6 of this Parliament. So in October of 2022, we secured the right to introduce a bill. So that 1 month period of gaining the MSP's support, the Scottish Government also have a chance there to intervene and to say that they're going to take the bill off of us and run with it as their own policy. They didn't do that. So we secured the right to introduce the bill in October 2022, and since then we have been drafting the bill. The bill process has been informed in a slightly different way from previous attempts. So of course there's the consultation data that I've touched upon that has fed into the drafting in a huge way. We never had that before. The public consultation received a 76% support rate, over 14,000 people. That had never happened before. We had ran public consultations, but the level of support wasn't anywhere near what it was. In part, that is, I don't think, because we have more public support. I think it's because of the campaign groups who are supporting this, including Friends at the End and MyDeath-MyDecision. They have really galvanised, and they have a proper strategic plan for supporting Liam's bill. And again, I'll come on to that in a second. So the drafting has been informed, of course, by the consultation, and the consultation gave us such rich data that we had never had, Scotland-specific data that we'd never had before. We had, of course, as you would imagine, thousands and thousands of personal testimony from people living in Scotland and from family members. So the argument that we don't need assisted dying in Scotland, we need better palliative care, which we do, and it's important to say at this juncture that Liam McArthur and his team fully support all proposals to better palliative care across the UK. But we can then point to this anecdotal data from people throughout Scotland to say people have had excellent palliative care and end-of-life care generally, and have still needed access to this choice. So that's a really important. That's been really important in gaining the support of other members of Parliament who didn't necessarily before see the need for assisted dying in Scotland. Some of the themes from the consultation I'm just going to touch on now. As I said, we had a 76% support rate. One of the main themes from those who supported assisted dying and who opposed it was the definition of terminal illness. So in Scotland, Liam's proposal is tied to the only sort of piece of legislation that deals with terminal illness in Scotland, which is the Social Security Act. That removed any time limits, as you saw them in terms of accessing benefits towards the end of your life. So it removed this 6-month time limit where people had to prove that they had 6 months left to live to access end-of-life benefits. So the only statutory definition that we have of terminal illness in Scotland doesn't include a time limit. It is a progressive illness, disease or condition that is reasonably expected to end your life. And proponents and opponents of Liam's proposal really picked up on this in the consultation. You can read the summary report that we published there as well around the definition of terminal illness and how people want that to be firmed up and people would like it to be extended wider than that. I'm not in a position today to divulge any of the kind of drafting policies that we have in place, but that was certainly the main theme, and you can see that in the consultation report as well. The main opposition to Liam's proposal, as evidenced via the consultation, of course, was religious organisations. Something that is a bit of a concern for us is that the majority of organisations who responded, so not individuals, the majority of organisations who responded to Liam's proposal were opposed to it. And that is because it really just comes down to a numbers game. There are 3 main organisations supporting the proposal in Scotland. So there's Dignity in Dying Scotland and Humanist Society Scotland and Friends at the End. That's 3. And we had numerous churches and church organisations who responded, so that's what I mean in terms of it being a numbers game. We're actively still trying to engage with people who are opposed, particularly churches and other organisations who have voiced their concerns, particularly in this drafting stage. In terms of professionals, so we're talking about doctors and lawyers and other professionals, and particularly healthcare professionals, that was very split. So there was a 50-50 almost split between professionals on their views on the proposal. Something that we can really point to, though, is the number of healthcare professionals who responded to the consultation who were supportive but wished to remain anonymous. And they gave, again, lots of anecdotal examples, both from their professional and their personal life. And that is something that, we've gone back to them and we're engaging with them and we're having dialogue with them, but so many are afraid to put their head above the parapet because of this sort of vociferous opposition that we are seeing. The other way that the drafting that we're doing at present has been informed in a different way from previous is that we established the Medical Advisory Group in Scotland. So this is a group of healthcare practitioners in palliative care, mental capacity, public health and other specialities. And we formed that group in April of last year to help inform the medical aspects of the bill. We have a very small team working on the bill. We work in conjunction with the non-government bills unit at Parliament. But because it is a members' bill, it's essentially a backbenchers' bill, there isn't a huge team working on this. So this subsidiary was set up, and importantly it was chaired by Sandesh Gulhani MSP, who is also a GP. So Sandesh is of course a GP, he is a member of our Parliament and he is supportive of the proposal. So they spent a number of weeks taking evidence on the medical aspects of the bill and how the patient pathway would look, right through from the patient first raising this with their doctor to how it would look in practice once assisted death had taken place. And they produced a report which you can read online as well, and I know Emma's going to link to some of this just now via our tweets. But they unanimously supported Liam's proposal. They did make some suggestions for tweaking it, but that's been hugely useful because there aren't medics on Liam's team. We don't have doctors there who are helping to inform this. It also helped to sort of myth bust around palliative care don't want to see assisted dying come to fruition in Scotland. You can't assess mental capacity at the end of life. It really helped to address concerns and kind of break them down. We've also been meeting with lots of different stakeholders, and it's important to state that having worked on Margot's bill previously and trying to have meetings with people like the GMC, the BMA, the Royal Colleges, Public Health, other people in Scotland who wouldn't engage with the previous proposal in 2013 and 2015. We're now having meetings with all of these organisations and they're feeding into the drafting of the bill. We reached out to them, some responded to the consultation, some didn't. We reached out to them on the basis of we need to see what you need in this bill so that we can incorporate that as much as we can into the drafting. So all of these things have helped inform the bill process in a way that they didn't previously, so that we're confident that this bill is going to be the strongest one that Scotland has ever brought forward. Again, referring back to the committee and others saying that we couldn't just parachute in evidence, for example, from Oregon, Australia and other places, we had some Scotland-specific research done since the last bill fell in 2015. So I myself did a PhD on Scots law and assisted dying, and that was published last year, and that's fed into the bill process, particularly around the safeguarding aspects of this. And again, that was one of the main themes, if you read the consultation report, is that the opposition have concerns that assisted dying would put vulnerable people at risk, and there are some genuine concerns there which we need to address. But there's this shift between an assisted dying law actually being a protective measure. Again, the consultation gave us lots of evidence that showed that assisted dying is happening in Scotland, but it's not from the patient, it's not from the patient advocating and asking this from themselves, it's quite often done on two patients. So that's one of the angles that we're working with as well, is how the law sets boundaries around behaviour. We've also had some research around disability concerns, so Professor Ben Colburn at Glasgow University, he's published some data as well on the views of, again, as Isabel touched upon, about how the views of disabled people in the disabled community don't necessarily align with those of the hierarchy, as she put it. So this is all really useful, kind of Scotland-specific, really rich data that we haven't had previously, and this is all feeding into us drafting the bill. I'll go through some of the aspects of the bill in a second, but I'm just going to, I've touched upon the organisations who are supporting the bill in Scotland and how they are feeding in their separate ways. Of course, we know that Dignity and Dying Scotland are the big sort of public-facing campaign. Humanist Society Scotland as well have an awful lot of members who they can call upon to, for example, respond to consultations, etc. But I'm just going to, given that they're one of the sponsors of the event, I'm going to hand over to Emma just for a second to outline exactly how Friends at the End are supporting us in Liam's office.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can all hear me. Thanks, Amanda. That's great. Yeah, so Friends at the End, we work in Scotland. As Amanda said, we've supported 3 bills now to pass through Parliament, but I don't think we've ever been as close as we are now. And we're really talking about what happens after the bill passes, which is wonderful and great news and really encouraging. Part of our role is engaging with MSPs. We meet with them, a board meets with them, and we have conversations. We help them to think about things through from different perspectives, and we help them to understand the safeguards and things that we can put in place, which hopefully removes the opposition that they have to the bill. We also do other stakeholder engagement. We think about education with healthcare professionals. We're trying to think about how is this going to work in Scotland once the bill passes. What do we need to have in place, what are the services, what's the support that we need to have there for people to be able to access assisted dying and for healthcare professionals to feel comfortable and confident in offering that service as well. We sponsor Amanda in Liam McArthur's office and we also provide the secretariat service for the End of Life cross-party group, which is an important opportunity and time when we bring people together who are involved in the political system to think about how we take things forward. Just want to thank MDMD today for having us along, and I'm really delighted to see all of you here. As has been mentioned, we're a small campaign too. If you can join us, you're very welcome. You don't have to live in Scotland to be part of the Scottish campaign, just as much as we also try to help support the campaigns in other parts of the world and across the rest of the UK as well, in providing them with support. If we can get this bill past the line in Scotland, it will help everywhere else across the UK. Thank you.
Just give me 1 second. Thanks so much, Emma. Okay, so what's next? I'm going to run through some of the detail that we might see in the bill, but first of all, I'll give a bit of the sort of background on the process. So we're drafting the bill. We hope to introduce it at some point this year, certainly in session 6 anyway. We do need to have our eye on the fact that there's a general election coming up and that Parliament at some point will go into purdah as well. So we have a very strategic plan around the timing from when we want to introduce the bill. However, it's important to say that there are so many things that are out with our control. The next staging post for us is to introduce the bill at the end of this year. What happens then in the Scottish Parliament is that it will be given to a committee. It will most likely go to the Health Committee. In previous proposals that's went to Justice and Health and Sport, it will more than likely go to the Health Committee here this time, and only the Health Committee. The Health Committee at present is made up of MSPs who are supportive of Liam's proposal, some of who even signed the proposal as part of the 36 MSPs. However, that can change, so this is what I mean around the sort of moving parts of this and how we have this strategic plan, but not everything is under our control. Committees change all the time. The committee will call in people like MDMD, Friends at the End, and the other campaign groups and the other stakeholders, many of whom responded to the consultation, and they will ask them to give written evidence or oral evidence. This again is another point where the people like yourselves, campaigners, the public can get involved with lobbying and trying to inform those discussions. The committee will then produce a report, so they will, there's 3 positions they can take. They can either suggest to Parliament that the proposal passes, they can suggest that it does not pass, and they can take no opinion on it. Given that this is a conscience issue, it is more than likely that they will take no opinion on the bill. Following that, we have the stage 1 debate, and that's when the full chamber of MSPs come together to vote on the bill as we will introduce it hopefully at the end of this year. It's important to say that this is the furthest any bill has ever got in the Scottish Parliament. There's been 2 previous attempts and they've both fallen at stage 1. So we hope to be successful at stage 1. We are confident that we have the support within Parliament. Liam McArthur is the Deputy Presiding Officer of the Scottish Parliament. He's a very seasoned politician and he wouldn't have agreed to be the member in charge of this had he not been confident that we have support amongst his colleagues. Following stage 1, we go to stage 2, and that's when we have amendments, and that's when we will likely see the government and others step in. And again, that's another stage for campaigners to come in and try and influence those decisions, to really shape and mould the legislation to what you would like it to look like, any improvements, any changes from the proposal in the bill as it has been lodged. It goes back to the committee and they sign off on the amendments and the bill is given back. We have a stage 2 vote, and from there it really is just sort of procedural. So if you get past stage 2, you're on to stage 3, which is the final vote, and then it goes to royal assent. Those are the kind of administrative side of things. What I will do is I'll go through what we think the bill. I can't obviously give you, as Isabel has a printout of what the bill is going to look like, but I'll just give a quick rundown of the things that we feel are really important to include. So in terms of the role of healthcare practitioners, we need to see a conscientious objection in there, and that's certainly a theme that came through the consultation, was that many of them were supportive, but many of their colleagues weren't, and that we need to have this option for opting out. Some of you might be aware of the sort of constitutional issues around drafting legislation in Scotland as it relates to reserved matters. There wasn't a conscientious objection on the previous bills because that the regulation of healthcare professionals is reserved to Westminster. So we couldn't have that on the face of the bill. However, it is crucially important that if we can, we have it as part of the body of this bill. We have been having conversations with people in the Westminster government to see if we can make that work. We are going to have, as well, we've had discussions around a duty to refer, so some of you might be au fait with the duty to refer as it relates to abortion. So if a patient seeks assisted dying and wants to have the conversation with their healthcare practitioner, but they don't want to, they want to exercise their conscience and opt out, there is going to be hopefully a duty to refer there as well. Mandatory training is something that we've looked at as well, and particularly looked at how other jurisdictions are dealing with this. So Australia, New Zealand, the States, and I'll say at this juncture that Liam's bill is modelled on templates from places like Australia, New Zealand and the US states, rather than other jurisdictions, for example, Canada or jurisdictions in Europe. So mandatory training is something that was a theme that came through when we were doing the research for the medical advisory group. We had healthcare practitioners from Canada, from Australia, from New Zealand and from US states who said that you really need that mandatory training in there if you want doctors to sign up to this. So what I'll do now is, just in the interest of time, I'm going to run through what we think the patient pathway would look like. So I think that's probably where most people are interested in terms of how this would actually work in Scotland. So if you were unwell, had a terminal illness, you go to your healthcare practitioner, that may be your consultant, it may be your GP or someone else, and you state that you want to have the conversation about assisted dying. That then kicks the ball rolling, and you fill out your paperwork there with your, what we call the coordinating practitioner. If they accept your request, then you move forward through the process. If not, again, the duty to refer kicks in. Then it is medical assessments. So this bill is for people who are over 16 years old and who are terminally ill. 16 years old in Scotland is the age of mental capacity, it's the age of competency. I know that differs from the rest of the UK, but that's what our law is, so that's what will be on the face of the bill most likely. They'll have their medical assessment, they will go to the independent doctor to have that verified, to have the checks and balances for competency, for coercion, and all of these other things in place. They'll have discussions around palliative and other end-of-life care that the patient might want. Again, they're under no obligation to accept this, but it's a very holistic, patient-centred approach that we're taking here. It's important to say as well that we see a role for nurse practitioners in this process, in this patient pathway, and that is something that has been adopted in other jurisdictions. The previous bills in Scotland only had doctors, so registered medical doctors, as dealing with this, but we see a role for healthcare practitioners more broadly. So the 2 medical assessments would be undertaken by doctors, and if everything goes well, we get through the process and the person is accepted to have an assisted death. In terms of how that works practically, there is a 14-day period. I know that you're not a fan of it, Isabel, but there's a 14-day period, but that 14-day period starts once the person has made their first request for assisted dying. It had previously been that the 14-day period would start once you'd been through the whole process, so then you would have to sit for 14 days reflecting on whether you wanted to go through with it or not. The 14-day period now starts, and in that 14 days you can have your second assessment, you can arrange any other competency, or if there are referrals that need made around psychiatry or other help and support, that can all be undertaken within the 14 days. So we envisage that it would take at least that amount of time anyway for this whole thing to be set up. You would then have essentially the green light, and a healthcare practitioner collects the medication from the pharmacy, so there isn't ever any point where the patient or the patient's family or anyone like that collects the medication, and that is a change from previous bills. In the last bill in Scotland, we had something called a licensed facilitator who would collect the medication, take it to the patient, and essentially facilitate the process. That's all changed with this proposal, again, based on the data and the evidence that we now have. The healthcare practitioner takes the medication to the patient. Again, they go through all of the checks and balances again around competency and coercion and everything else, and if they are happy to go ahead, the patient can self-ingest the medication. So there is no euthanasia, as we understand it, with this proposal. Again, that's a difference from previous attempts where Margaret MacDonald did seek to have that in her bill. This is self-administration only. Self-administration extends to drinking, swallowing, rectal administration, and in particular, we are very keen to make allowances for people who fit the criteria, being terminally ill, mentally competent, etc., but can't necessarily, for example, swallow if they've got throat cancer or something like that. So there are technological and medicinal ways that we can still support people to self-administer that isn't direct euthanasia. So the person would take the medication, and then all of the monitoring and reporting that we envisage would kick in. That's really, really important as well, because with previous bills we hadn't made provision for that. It's something that the government have been really keen to see. It's something that healthcare practitioners have been keen to see, and academics and others, in terms of how we track assisted dying and how it's working. It's important again to say that the healthcare practitioner with this proposal remains with the patient at all times. So there isn't a point where the patient is left with the medication. That is for safety purposes, and it is a response essentially to feedback that we received from healthcare practitioners, the government, and via the consultation. So that's how we envisage it happening in Scotland. The bill, hopefully, as I've said, will be introduced at some point this year. It then goes through the process that I've outlined, but we are confident that we have the support within Parliament to get this through. We are confident as well that within the next 5 years, people in Scotland hopefully will be able to access this legal right in the same way that Trevor's outlined. There's 350 million people worldwide who do. That is a very quick rundown of what we've been working on over the last couple of years, and I'm happy to take any questions.